A new British study into food waste has found that about half of all the world's food ends up in the bin rather than on people's plates. The study from the UK Institution for Mechanical Engineers, of all things, says that this waste is caused by things like poor storage, those strict sell-by dates in shops, as well as bulk offers from supermarkets, and what they describe as consumer fussiness. I think that's you and me. Local studies have also found a similar level of waste here in Australia. Jon Dee is the founder of the group DoSomething, which runs the Foodwise campaign. Jon Dee, welcome to the program.
Good evening.
Now, when they talk about 50% waste, that's between sort of the fields where the crops are grown,
yes,
and our plates. Where is it going amiss in that chain?
Well, basically, we're growing about 4 billion tonnes of food every single year around the world, and this report says that they estimate that we're throwing away about 1.2 to 2 billion tonnes worth. So the waste is happening in a number of places. On one hand, it's at the farm, and more so, especially in developing countries. Then the actual distribution system for food, there's a lot being wasted there. Then at the supermarkets and retailers, a huge amount of waste there. And of course, in our homes here in Australia, about 40% of our garbage bins is food waste. So we're throwing out about $8 billion worth of food, edible food, every single year.
Well, let's start at the beginning of that process, at the farm gate or the field, and the waste that's happening there. How much of it? One of the things that's talked about in the European context is the quotas, and that you can plant a field and you can get government subsidies to grow oats or wheat or whatever it is, but then you'll then get a subsidy to dig it back in again, and nobody ever eats it.
Well, the real issue, I think, in developed countries like Australia and in Europe and in America is it doesn't matter if you can grow, a whole range of food, but if the supermarkets say cosmetically it's not up to scratch, or that banana isn't quite the right length, then unfortunately you've got to literally dig it back in the ground. So if you look at Queensland as an example, they estimate about a third of the Queensland banana crop doesn't even make it past the farm gate. So a lot of those pressures that are resulting in food waste are actually coming from supermarkets setting very high standards, and they say in turn, to give them credit, that they are only responding to consumers, and that consumers want this perfect vegetable, perfect fruit, and unfortunately that is resulting in huge amounts of food waste.
Okay, so we're fussy. How have we become fussy? Because a few generations ago we had a banana tree up the back. We had a veggie patch. We accepted that there were spots on our fruit. Now, not so much.
I actually don't think it's so much. I think the consumers have been, had so much marketing thrown at them as to this is what you should expect when you come to one of the major supermarkets. This is what you should be asking for. So I think we've ended up being a bit unrealistic about the kind of food that we have. And at a time when so many Australians are relying on people like Food Bank, OzHarvest and Second Bite for food assistance, a huge number of Australians. There's a real hunger epidemic happening in Australia, and at the time we're doing that, we're in a situation where so much food is being rejected and ending up being dug back into the ground because it doesn't meet that perfect standard. That's a real problem.
And there's also a high proportion of what we do buy, even the U-Butte-looking identical picture of banana that we take home in a bunch from the shops, that sits at home and then we end up tossing it out.
Well, that's the real problem. What we're finding now with the research that DoSomething have done and the New South Wales government have done with Love Food, Hate Waste, we've looked at what are people doing wrong, and we find that they're not using up the food they already have in their fridge, their pantry or their freezer. They're not writing a shopping list to use up the existing stuff they've got, and when they do go shopping, they go shopping when they're hungry, they fall prey for 2-for-1 offers, they get back, then they don't store the food properly, so it goes off way before it actually needs to go off, and then we're serving portions that are far too big, and then the result being that we're throwing away stuff into landfill. Now the problem there is that when you throw away food, you throw away all the resources, the water, the energy, the diesel that went into getting the food from the paddock to your plate. But when you throw it away, when it rots, it gives off methane, a greenhouse gas that's 25 times more potent than the carbon pollution coming out of your car exhaust. So the actual impact is far bigger than I think most people realise.
Yeah. Now, Meredith, this is something that you've had a bit of an interest in as well, and the kinds of foods that are more environmentally damaging as well.
Oh, look, I have a bit of a passion about lecturing people about meat eating. I eat meat, but also the idea of having very large pets that eat a large amount of meat, because a very interesting academic book that came out last year pointed out that one medium-sized dog is the equivalent, has the carbon footprint, the equivalent of running 2 four-wheel drives for a year, because the most carbon-intensive thing you can do is grow meat. That's what the rainforests of, Brazil are being cut down for is to put cattle in there. So the sorts of food you eat too is having a real effect on the environment.
That's an important point, because what we found, we've recently launched a DoSomething Meat-Free Mondays, so meatfreemondays.com.au, and the idea is to get people to think about what kind of diet do they have. And Rosemary Stanton is one of our ambassadors for that. And talking to her was interesting. She said that Australians are actually eating, men in particular, are eating double the amount of meat that they should do for a healthy diet, and women not much less than that. And I think that is something that we do need to look at.
Who's going to do this, though? I mean, you can't see Coles and Woolies running a campaign saying, look, buy less, eat less from us. It's their interest in getting us to buy as much as possible, isn't it?
Well, I think it's a good point, because I think that's where government come in. So the New South Wales government, to their credit, have launched Love Food, Hate Waste to try and educate people about how do you make your food last longer, because they found that the average household is wasting about $1,000 of food every single year. So there's political points to be scored in actually showing people how to make their food go further.
And economic points.
And it reduces the footprint. And what we've done at foodwise.com.au, our website on this campaign, is show people the practical things you can do in your home that use up the existing food, because I think that's part of the problem, is that we do not use up the food we've already bought. And we're far too quick to throw that food away.
Now, how do we know? Is this down to sort of better education of consumers? Because if you buy some chicken thigh fillets from the supermarket and it says used by the 17th, and there is almost this assumption, I can't give the family that, it's the 18th. They'll all keel over with salmonella poisoning or something. I mean, do we need to have a better understanding of what best before and used by actually means?
That's a good point. Our research that we did for the Foodwise campaign showed that there's real confusion about what is used by, what is best before. And best before really is an advisory. It says that it should be best before that date, but it doesn't mean you can't carry on eating that food after that best before date. And people get the best before date mixed up with the use by date, when you should not eat the food after that. So people get very easily confused, and I think that's why we need to get better education. Certainly at the school level, I think a lot of food waste is coming from young people. People are earning over $100,000 a year, people with kids, obviously. There's a lot of kids who just don't eat everything put out there on their plate. And I think we've lost the skill of how do we turn that leftover food into brand new food. So I was lucky. I had a grandmother who, she could get leftover food and the next day turn it into something that didn't even resemble slightly what the meal was the day before. And I think that we've lost a lot of those skills, I think.
I would agree that I think pre-refrigeration, pre-mass production, pre-the corporatisation of agriculture, pre-genetic engineering, the ancients probably did have a body of wisdom about food that we have frankly completely lost. Having said that, I think we ought to recognise in a long-term historical perspective to be in a situation where we can sustain this whole population while wasting 25% of everything we grow. It's a good problem to have. It's better than the problems of North Korea, for example, and the historical problem of humans of starvation. So you have to say, to the agricultural sector, to the mass producers, to the capitalists, to the refrigerators, well done.
At the point, though, that 800 million people go to bed hungry every night. So whilst we're throwing away 1.2 billion to 2 billion tonnes of food a year, 800 million people are going hungry, and I think we need to start putting people first.
Yeah, but those 800 million are not going hungry because they are going hungry because of political failures, because of civil war, because of violence.
Not always. Well, this is what this research showed that came out of London, was that it actually is often down to the fact that they don't have the technology and the resources to get the food from the farm and distribute it to people, so it's going rotten on the way there.
Here's something that I'm sure would be wildly unpopular amongst politicians to consider, but they do say, and the studies prove, that one of the great ways of getting people to stop smoking cigarettes is to make them $20 a pack. A lot of this food is cheap food that we're allowing to go off, even if it has a big environmental impact. You don't often throw out half a packet of $15 pate. It's the lettuce that goes mushy in the crisper. Do we need to be charging more for food to reflect not just the cost of manufacturing in an economic sense, but also the cost to the environment?
Absolutely not. I think at the end of the day we're very lucky. There are so many people who struggle with food poverty in Australia, the hidden epidemic that we have here. And so if we can make food available cheaply, that's great, but I think the key thing we need to look at is how can we make sure that people know how to store that food properly? How do they plan for the week ahead when it comes to what they're going to cook? And that's what we've looked at with our Do Something's Foodwise campaign, is how can we make people more food-wise so that the food they do get, no matter what their income level is, they make it last as long as possible.
I just think there are limits. There is this, sort of higher conscience. I'm anti-waste, okay, and I wish you well, and I hope you have great success, okay. But I also think there are limits to the power of the state to intervene in people's lives and teach them how to use a refrigerator.
I also think there
we're
needs
just
to
about out
be
of time, but we should all...
education for young boys about these things, because...
And a good recipe for bubble and squeak. Thank you all to our panellists and to Jon Dee as well, Meredith Bergman, John Stanley and Ross Cameron. You can stay in touch with the Drum website over the weekend, abc.net.au/The Drum, and join us again on Monday night. Hope to see you then.